I've played every single dungeon on Fabled Legacy thanks to my Noob to Godly series. But which one do I find best? Well, today I'm going to be making a tier list of all the Fabled Legacy dungeons as of today. Here is the tier list. Here are all 11 dungeons. Now, these will be based on my opinions that I kind of did in my Noob to Godly, since that was kind of my playthrough. If you disagree with these, that's fine. Leave it down in the comments. And well, yeah. So let's go ahead and begin with Raided Village, the very first dungeon in the game. Now, for this dungeon, honestly, it is a pretty unique of a first dungeon. Now, I do feel it does do a little bit things weird. Like, for example, like the first text for the first boss can be a little bit confusing for the players in general. But I still feel like it can be a decent starting experience for the players. It can be pretty interesting overall. And we also ended up getting a secret here, so I think I'm gonna give this a really an A tier here. I might change my mind B, but I think this fits in an A tier best. So honestly, a pretty nice starting dungeon. But now we go into Sunken Fortress next. Next up is the Sunken Fortress. Now this is the second dungeon and first dungeon with 3 bosses. Now I did actually like how they developed 3 bosses things similar to Dungeon Quest here, and it went going slowly with 2 bosses and then 3 bosses here, so I think that's pretty nice. Though I do find a little bit of issues with the dungeon with it being a little confusing. For example, in the areas here, if you stand on there, you can actually maybe be hit by that attack there, basically the attack going up, and there's no real way to indicate it. Also, in the second boss, there's some confusing parts that are for example, the rock parts that you could stand on them, but that would result on you dying, which is also another thing that I invented when I did my 1-hour challenge here. Now, honestly, I think the dungeon is nice, but definitely not better than Raided Village, to be honest, but it's definitely something that I find is an okay dungeon, and I did get decently lucky there, too. I think the tier that Sunken Fortress should be going is B tier. I think it's a little fitting, not as good as Raided Village, but I think Sunken Fortress is pretty decent. It has a nice underground vibe overall. Now, we're going to go ahead and move on to the Cursed Marsh next. Now, for Cursed Marshes, even though this was a dungeon that we did get decently lucky, I wasn't a big fan of this one. I feel like it lacked detail. Maybe it was a thing that happened because I played with less graphics or something like that. I'm not sure. I don't know. It felt like it lacked something. Also, another Grand Tree Tucker here. There was a hidden reference there that I feel like, since it's in the newer area, I feel like people aren't gonna really understand. So I actually had to ask people for that. What do you mean out for revenge or something like that? But now that I understood it, I still feel like I'm not a big fan of this dungeon due to how it is. This is probably going to be one of my lower rated ones. So yeah, I'm just going to cut straight to it and give this where I think it should go. So for this one, I honestly think I'm going to give this a D tier. I might put it down to F. I mean, I don't like it. Maybe the design, maybe it's just me. It's not my cup of tea, honestly. Let's go ahead and move on to the next one. Next up we have here is Ragnox Descent. Now for Ragnox Descent, this one, what reminds me is the painful final boss. Honestly, I hated this final boss here, and this was the first dungeon I think we had to step away from hardcore difficulty so we could do it on regular difficulty, and we could clear more dungeons easier like that. I overall found this dungeon to be pretty annoying. To be honest, the bosses were pretty annoying. And here's, I think, where it started to show that nukes started happening. Basically, the nukes say, oh, this person did said nuke. I personally hate that feature. I don't know why that thing's in here. And it'll be in future dungeons, but it was firstly showed here. And I, again, am not a fan about this. But here's where I introduced it, and I'm not really a fan of it. Honestly, probably my least favorite dungeon. This one's going into the F tier. I don't like this one bit due to everything kind of combined. Now, let's go ahead and move on to the next one. Thundering Peaks is next. And honestly, this one also has a boss I don't like. But honestly, besides that, I think the entire rest of the dungeon is here. And sorry if there is a little bit lag right here. But honestly, I did actually enjoy this dungeon, besides that little final boss found annoying, which I did say that on my title, that say I hate Caradon. But honestly, I felt like the dungeon was nice, like the design was alright overall, but I can't say it was that crazy, and I feel like the hatred towards Koraidon kind of has to peg it down a notch. So I honestly can't put this too high on the tier list, but I did find every other boss to be pretty fine. So here's where I'm going to place it on the tier list. So I'm going to end up giving this one the C tier right here and leaving it right there. Now, let's go ahead and move on to the next dungeon. Next one we have here is Fallen Paradise. Now this boss, or basically the dungeon, was a little tricky, but I actually did decently end up liking this one, even though its stuff was a little hard here, a lot of jumping, especially here in this Corrupt Warrior. But I did find the dungeon to be pretty good overall, and I found it to be decently enjoyable, even though right here I'm clearly showing the levels of a skill issue. But honestly, I think it's a pretty decent dungeon, a pretty enjoyable one, and well, here's where I think I should place it on the tier list. Honestly, I think the best one to fit this one to is going to be the B tier below Sunken Fortress, but I'm going to leave it right here. B tier seems pretty fitting for it. Next up is the Eternal Domain. Now for the Eternal Domain, a lot of the green dungeon, and I specifically remember in this dungeon, I had a thumb that like didn't work, like it moved super weirdly. I don't know, I just wanted to say that. But honestly, this was the return of the double bosses. Now, I wasn't a big fan of like how some of the things were like here. I feel like they weren't explained properly the best. Maybe it's a skill issue in my part, but I feel like it was a little forced or something like that, and a little bit like that. So I wasn't the biggest fan of it, to be honest. Also, the double boss on having Pan-Q here, like what's the goddamn point of like having two bosses and having a third one right here? Like I get the yin and yang thing, that's actually pretty unique, I will give it that. But I kind of feel like this is a little confusing, and if I'm right, this at the end of the bosses here, you actually get teleported at the final boss, which I'm not a big fan of. But besides that, I still find the dungeon pretty nicely. I do like the yin and yang like concept overall, and I definitely think the attack is nice. But that's kind of about it. I'm gonna be giving this one a C tier. I think it's fitting there. I'm actually gonna put this higher than Koraidon right here. Top of the C tier, or I might swap these two. Honestly, these two are swappable. Bottom of the B tier and bottom of the C tier. These two are swappable, honestly. But yeah, let's go ahead and move on to Stardust Citadel. Stardust Citadel is next, and oh my goodness, I love this dungeon. I actually love the design of it. I actually think it's a really cool dungeon. Now, I'm not really good at the bosses either. Well, that's kind of like a repeated thing, maybe because I'm just trash. But honestly, I liked the design of the dungeon. I liked how the bosses were done. I loved the traveling through portals. That was super interesting. I felt like that was super a unique way to take it. Also, star attacks that are just going on here. Those are just so cool. Man, I just feel like I'm going crazy over this dungeon because it's honestly my favorite dungeon in, the entire game, because I think it's a really good one. And, well, including the mobs and how well everything is done. So, honestly, I think you guys know where I'm going to place this on the tier list. I'm going to give this a S tier. There we go, and we actually filled all of these now. That's nice. Alright, 3 dungeons left. Let's go ahead and move on to the next dungeon. Eternal Farlands is next, and honestly, what I find interesting is the huge difference between bosses. Between boss 1, the second boss right here, and the third boss right here. Honestly, the difference is kind of insane how different all these bosses are. But it's honestly something pretty unique, and I honestly kind of like the dungeon, especially the first boss and its little like fishes going all around, and I feel like it's a nice thing. Also, I really like the Ember Wing. I think it's pretty cool. And honestly, it's a pretty good chill dungeon. Honestly, an enjoyable one out of like all of them. Well, for this one, I'm honestly going to give this one an A tier. Honestly, pretty nice. Actually, I'm going to give this my second favorite dungeon right here. Honestly, I think it's a pretty nice one overall. Let's go ahead and move on to the next one. With the second to last dungeon, honestly, this one is a pretty nice one. A lot of the white and red theme right here kind of like reminds me of like, I feel like it's a better Underworld. I don't know, maybe that's just me, better Underworld than Dungeon Quest right here. I don't know, that's just me being me. But honestly, I kind of enjoyed this dungeon, even though it's definitely a pretty difficult one. I struggled on a pretty decent bit. But honestly, I still found it to be a pretty nicely and, well, honestly, a pretty enjoyable dungeon between its bosses. I was found weird that the final boss had a little bit less HP, but, like, I still found the dungeon, like, pretty enjoyable overall. Like, I feel like it was a pretty good dungeon. So, honestly, I felt it's pretty good. Now, for this one, I'm going to place this on A tier, overrated village. I like this one a lot. Now, there we go. I'm going to leave it there. Third place so far. And honestly, I like this dungeon. I especially like the little slide parts of it that I didn't show on the video part there. My bad. But we have one more, which is the Fallen Forsaken dungeon, which is the final dungeon. Let's take a look at what I think about this dungeon. Now, for this one, a little tricky for me, honestly, to think of a tier, honestly, when I was starting to make this one, when I started thinking about it. Honestly, Final Dungeon feels like a big jump in difficulty from, like, let's say, the first difficulty to second, like, normal to expert. Like, that was so hard. Like, I don't know if that's intentional, but the difficulty jump is, like, so insane. But I did like the dungeon overall. Shifts between mobs, bosses, like the big red thing that happens after the first boss. I think that's really interesting. Though I'm not a big fan of, like, how a few things are done. For example, like the second boss is like big black sides. It's just a little confusing for me. And also, like, the bonus boss that's done in chaos mode, it just looks like a big black blob of, like, just a monstrosity that doesn't really look that crazy, or just looks a little confusing, to be honest. But that's pretty much about it. Here's where I'd place them on the tier list. And finishing this right here, I'm going to place this in B tier. I'm going to place this one here. Honestly, I think this, no, actually, I'm going to put this here, top of the B tier. I think it's pretty fitting for it. And with that wraps up my tier list. Here the whole thing it is. Well, did you guys agree with this tier list? Disagree? Leave your comments below. Did I cook? Should I never cook again? Well, you guys already know how it works. Comment down below. I will probably answer. And, well, I hope you enjoyed this little tier list. I also want to say that I did do this before the Calamity or final episode of the Noob the Godly series. I don't know if it will release before or after. Kind of depends. I'm not really sure. But I hope you enjoyed. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to subscribe. YouTube says you'll like this video on your screen right now. And waddle out, my friends.